finishing up the apology won't take long. I don't think we'll actually be here the whole hour and a half or whatever, because I'm going to skip quite a bit of Poetics. So, choose one of these, obviously like before. Radical, coherent, well-organized, well-written essay, strong thesis, support your essay, sufficient references to the text. Notice I added this time. That means there has to be some references to whatever the texts are. Include a works cited page. Include a significant and meaningful title. 600 to 1,200 words, or roughly 3 to 4 pages, no more. Okay? And you get a little bit longer to work on this one, about a week and a half. If you want to turn it in before then, because you've got other stuff to do that day, by all means, feel free to. So, the first one, and this is why you don't have a quiz today, because I was trying to come up with somewhat decent questions. Compare and contrast the roles of Clytemnestra and Antigone. How are they similar? How are they different? What motivates them? Do they have similar motivations? Are they plausible? That is, are their actions believable based upon what we know about their characters? Do their actions seem plausible based upon their characters? Are they admirable, condemnable? If one were to be held up as a role model, who would that be and why? Be complete, offer plenty of supporting evidence. 2. Both Aeschylus and Sophocles and Socrates in the Apology seem to be very concerned with the theme of justice, whether human or divine. Okay? Discuss that theme in, should be not the one, but in one of the plays by Aeschylus. You choose which one. One by Sophocles and Socrates' Apology. Okay? 3. In his Poetics, Aristotle says that the reversal of fortune suffered by the tragic hero is a result, quote, not of vice, but of some great error or frailty in the tragic hero. Apply the statement to Sophocles' Antigone. What is the great error or frailty of the tragic hero of that play? Who is the tragic hero of that play? And why? You must answer that question before you can even begin to apply Aristotle's ideas to it. Who is the greatest sufferer? The protagonist. And then I, break the word down. Protos means first or chief. Agonist means sufferer in that play. Refer to both Aristotle and Sophocles in your response. Okay? 4. Discuss Socrates' allegory of the cave and what he says is the purpose of human life in the Apology. 5. What is the value today for students of literature to read Aeschylus, Sophocles, Plato, and Aristotle? To use the common, my term, detestable parlance, why are these writers relevant? Okay? And refer to each of them in your response. Take your pick. Okay. We left off, I believe, the other day. We had mentioned or had discussed to some extent Socrates talking about this oracle or sign which comes to him. And he says, and it's this thing that Miletus ridicules. This is page 1212. And one of you asked or suggested that, is this the daemon, also spelled this way, okay, both of which kind of mean genius that he's talking about, this inner spirit that tells you what you ought to do, become, etc. And I said, yeah, I think so. Socrates says he begins feeling these intimations, let's say, as a child. And that middle paragraph, he says, it always forbids but never commands me to do anything which I'm going to do. And it's this that keeps me from being a politician. Notice, it forbids certain things, but it never commands him to do something he's going to do. It's like this inner spirit, whatever it is, has already told him you need to do thus and thus. But this compulsion, this oracle, whatever it is, never, what it does is it says, don't. conscience, kind of. I mean, kind of. So he says, and it's what deters him from being a politician. And rightly, as I think. Why? For I am certain, O men of Athens, that if I had engaged in politics, I should have perished long ago, and done no good either to you or to myself. What kind of politician would he have been? What are politicians, for the most part, not known for? Honesty, candor, morality, thank you, okay?
General humanity.
Basic human decency, okay, I mean, we can get all cynical if you want, but let's not go there. So he says, for the truth is, no man who goes to war with you or any other multitude, honestly striving against the many lawless and unrighteous deeds which are done in the state, will save his life. That is, if he's trying to go against the lawless deeds of a state, and in doing that he's going against the state and the judges, he's not going to live long. First, evidence, enter into evidence, Antigone. She goes against the state law. She doesn't live long. He who will fight for the right, even if he would live even for a brief space, must have a private station and not a public one. Now, okay, test topic, relevance. If you're going to fight for, Socrates says, what is right? He means what is morally right, what is good, true, beautiful, etc. You can't do that how? This is counter to what almost every politician says. Almost every politician says, I have become a politician, why? To improve the world. To improve, the lives of common people. To make this world a better place. Socrates says you can't do that as a politician. Why not? What do politicians have to think about first and foremost? Then, even as much more so today, because these didn't have elected terms like ours do. What is every politician, what do they discover once they get elected?
They need to stay in office if they're going to have sort of.
Which means you get elected and you immediately start what? Running for re-election. Sometimes, even before, as a congresswoman, you're sworn in. You're already having people reach out to you to help you run your re-election 2 years later, or senator 6 years later. Okay? So he says, you got to have a private position in life. You got to be like one of us, or one of us with oodles and oodles of money, a Bill Gates, etc. So, skipping a couple paragraphs, or the big long paragraph, page 1213. He says, do you really imagine I could have survived all these years if I had led a public life? Okay, in here, he doesn't necessarily mean public, a politician's life. He means a life where I was out, on the TV screen, if they'd had TV screens, if I had been out in the public eye all the time. Because he keeps emphasizing that he's gone around asking his questions how? Quietly, nonchalantly, he just walked up to people who were supposed to be watching. He didn't bring all the press in, so to speak. Okay? He says, do you think I could have survived all these years? Supposing that like a good man, I had always maintained the right and had made justice, as I thought, the first thing? Do you think I could have survived in public life if everything I did was designed for simply the good or the truth? Now, it doesn't matter your politics. You might think XYZ politician has been good or true. But Socrates is kind of saying every politician, every public person has got to do what? At one point or another. They've got to shade the truth a little bit. They've got to cover the good a little bit in order to do something. Or they might have to do something a little bad. So, if anyone, skipping about 3 lines, if anyone likes to come and hear me while I am pursuing my mission, whether he be young or old, he's not excluded. That is, if someone wants to come hear me question others, I don't exclude them. Nor do I converse only with those who pay. But anyone, whether rich or poor, may ask and answer me and listen to my words. In other words, he's saying, my door is always open. I've never shut anybody out, and I've never asked for money. And whether he turns out to be a bad man or a good one, you can't blame that on me. So, because one of the charges against him is what? He corrupts the youth. And he said what? Really, would I really corrupt the youth if my living among the youth would make them bad? Does anybody want to live among bad people who are going to harm them? He uses a little bit of logic and says no. So, he says, whether he turns out to be a bad or good one, neither result can be justly imputed to me. Why? For I never taught or professed to teach him anything. That is, I just ask questions. He is saying, I was never a professor. Think of what that word means. One who professes, who speaks on behalf of, in support of. If he professed anything, it was what? I don't know anything. Kind of hard to be a professor of that. Well, I should take that back. So he says, so people are going to ask me, why do people delight in continually conversing with you? He says, I've told you. They like to hear the cross-examination of the pretenders to wisdom. There is amusement in it. We see that on the TV today all the time. We like to see what? The high and mighty brought down. Some of it's just out of pure spite. We don't like that somebody is high and mighty. Or some of it is out of envy. Why is that person high and mighty and not me? Okay. So he says, if I am or have been corrupting the youth, those of them who are now grown up and have become sensible that I gave them bad advice in the days of their youth should come forward as accusers. See, that's not Miletus, Anytus, and Lycon. Who's he talking about? Plato, you there, come here. Come on, Crito, come up. Have I been corrupting you? So he says, they should come forward as accusers, take their revenge. Or if they don't want to come themselves, that is, they're shy of the public eye, some of their relatives, fathers, brothers, or other kinsmen should say what evil their families have suffered at my hands. And what does he do? He starts naming people. For example, there's Crito, who's of the same age and the same deme with myself. That is, Crito is 70. He should know by now whether or not what I taught was good or bad. There's Critobulus or Critobulus. There's Antiphon. There's, Nikos, and he just starts rattling off people. So what does that do? That turns the whole attendance, the whole, the whole focus of the assembly on each of those individuals. And they don't stand up and say, Socrates, I accuse. For all these, he gets down into that paragraph, are ready to witness on behalf of the corrupter, of the injurer of their kindred, as Miletus and Anytus call me, not the corrupted youth only. There might have been a motive for that, but they're uncorrupted elder relatives. Why should they too support me with their testimony? Why indeed, except for the sake of truth and justice? That is, those names I just mentioned, They support me. Why? Because of truth and justice. And they know I'm speaking the truth and Miletus is a liar. Notice he does not mince words. He doesn't say, oh, poor Miletus, he's just confused. He's just mistaken. To call somebody a liar is implying something about intentionality on their part. Okay? So, this is my defense, he says. This and the like of this is all the defense. But one word more. Maybe there's some who's offended at me when he calls to mind how he himself on a similar or even a less serious occasion prayed and entreated the judges with many tears. In other words, maybe some of you are hoping for what? For Socrates to do what? Fall down on his face before the judges and do beg for mercy. Why? Because there might be some in the assembly who did that very same thing. He says, on less serious charges. He says, to that person, I may fairly reply, my friend, I am a man, and like other men, a creature of flesh and blood, and not of wood or stone, as Homer says. I have a family, sons, Athenians, 3 in number, 1 almost a man, 2 others still young. I will not bring any of them hither in order to petition you for an acquittal. That is, he's saying, and I'm not going to parade my family in here and use them for what? To kind of appeal to your sensibility. I'm not going to use my children to get me off. No, he says. Having regard to public opinion, I feel that such conduct would be discreditable to myself, to you, to the whole state. He's saying that's not appropriate. That's improper. One who has reached my years and who has a name for wisdom ought not to demean himself. Is he full of pride and arrogance? No, but he is saying there is such a thing as honor and integrity. And if he were to do that, he says, it would violate my integrity. Whether this opinion of me be deserved or not, at any rate, the world has decided that Socrates is in some way too superior to other men. He says, in fact, I've even seen men of reputation who've been condemned behaving in the strangest manner. They do what? They seem to fancy they were going to suffer something dreadful if they died. They act how? At the threat of a sentence of death. They beg and kick and scream. No, not death. And that they could be immortal if you only allowed them to live. And I think that such are a dishonor to the state, and that any stranger coming in would have said of them that the most eminent men of Athens, to whom the Athenians themselves give honor and command, are no better than women. He's not saying mere slaves. He's saying because women are prone, what? To more emotion than men. That's all he means by that. He's saying these are supposed to be the most eminent men of Athens. And what are they doing? They're crying to not be killed. Setting aside the question of public opinion, there seems to be something wrong in asking a favor of a judge. Asking a favor, making a bribe, and thus procuring an acquittal, instead of informing and convincing him. Please, judge, let me off. Why? I've got a family. I've got young children. What will happen to them? He's saying, no. The way you get an acquittal is how? You convince. Siri, I'm sorry, I don't get this whole gender thing. Yeah, really. For his duty is not to make a present of justice, that is the judge, but to give judgment. Notice, the purpose of the judge, the duty of the judge is not to make a present, a gift of justice. It's merely to render judgment. That is, to do what? What did the judges in the Eumenides have to do? Was Orestes guilty or innocent? They have to render a verdict. They have to sift the evidence. And he has sworn that he will judge according to the laws and not according to his own good pleasure. Isn't that one of the big issues right now in the legal system in the United States? Is whether or not judges are judging according to what is written in the laws or what they want to do. Anthony Kennedy, for example, Supreme Court Associate Justice, has said a number of times, when he considers cases before him, he doesn't only look to the Constitution and the U.S. case law. He also looks to foreign laws. The only problem with that is foreign laws have no basis in the American court system. They have basis if you are arrested overseas, because then you are tried according to those countries' laws. So he says a judge should act according to the laws and not according to his own good pleasure. And we ought not to encourage you, nor should you allow yourselves to be encouraged in this habit of perjury. He's saying judges who don't judge strictly according to what the law says perjure themselves. Oh, men of Athens, if by force of persuasion in entreaty I could overpower your oaths, their oaths to do justice, then I should be teaching you to believe that there are no gods, and in defending should simply convict myself of the charge of not believing in them. But that's not so. Notice, I would convict myself of the charge of not believing in them, but that is not so. Far otherwise. What does that mean? I do believe in the gods. For I do believe that there are gods, and in a sense higher than that in which any of my accusers believe in them. In other words, he seems to be suggesting, I believe there are gods. But the petty little gods that we think of, maybe not those. But gods even higher than that. And to you and to God I commit my cause to be determined by you as is best for you, and not only best for them, but by extension, best for the state, best for Athens, and best for me. Look at the footnote. So the jurors cast their votes. About 280 for conviction, 220 for acquittal. Plato doesn't describe the deliberations. Plato doesn't tell us whether there's debate that goes on. Okay? The text is complete as it is. It's just, he omits it. So what happens? He's convicted. And he says, a lot of reasons why I'm not grieved at the vote of condemnation. Is it because he wants to die? No. He says, I expected it. I'm only surprised the vote was so close. Why? Why is he surprised the vote was so close? How did he begin his defense? There's two kinds of charges, right? There's the early charges and the late charges. And he spends quite a bit of it trying to address the early charges. That is, those things that you were raised thinking about me. This is why he doesn't expect to be acquitted. Because that's a pretty tall order. Okay, to essentially try to unbias people who have been trained to think Socrates, he's a crazy old man. So, he goes on and says, so what should be the sentence? He, Meletus, and Anytus and Lycon, kind of along with them, proposes death as the penalty. And what shall I propose? Notice, he gets to propose. In an American court of law, you get found guilty, you don't get to go up to the judge and say, okay, judge, here's what I think the sentence should be. I murdered somebody, parole. What shall I propose? Clearly, that which is my due. That is, what do I deserve? What is my due? What return shall be made to the man who has never had the wit to be idle during his whole life? In other words, what shall be made to the man who has never kept his nose out of everybody else's business? That's what he means. But has been careless of what the many care for. Careless. I haven't cared for what the many do. And what do the many care for? Wealth, family interests, military offices, speaking in the assembly, magistracies, plots, parties. He's saying, I've had nothing to do with any of those things. Reflecting that I was really too honest a man to be a politician and live, I did not go where I could do no good to you or myself. In other words, I couldn't be a politician, so I didn't do what? I didn't go off where I couldn't be of any use, either for society or any good to myself. Meaning, I didn't go live in a cave. So what did he do? I went where the greatest good, where I could do the greatest good privately to every one of you. That's where I went. And sought to persuade every man among you that he must look to himself. Is he saying be a narcissist? No. And seek virtue and wisdom before he looks to his private interests. What does he mean by his private interests? Wealth, family, job, the state. Okay, so what's he talking about? It is the purpose of every person to do what? Seek virtue and wisdom first and foremost. Before you do any of this other stuff. And that he should look to the state before he looks to the interests of the state. And that this should be the order which he observes in all his actions. Virtue, wisdom, state. What shall be done to such a one? That is, so what should you do to me? What's he saying he never did? He never thought about himself. He never thought about his own interests. He thought about virtue, wisdom, and the good of the state. See, the interest of the state doesn't mean the good of the state. The interest of the state means what the state wants. See, what's good for the state and what the state wants are often two different things, right? Replace the word state with child. The good of a child and what the child wants are often two very different things. For the good of the child, you feed a child broccoli. What the child wants, two obviously different things. Okay? So what should you do to me? Doubtless some good thing. That is, you owe me. So what would be a good thing? The good should be of a kind suitable to him. Well, what kind of good would be suitable to him? A library of the best philosophy? Since he pursues virtue and wisdom? What would be a reward suitable to a poor man who is your benefactor and who desires leisure that he may instruct you? I'm obviously taking more time than I thought. There can be no reward so fitting as maintenance in the Prytaneum. So what's the Prytaneum? A place on the Acropolis where benefactors of Athens were honored. That is, it's almost like he's saying, you should erect a statue of me. Olympia in southwestern Greece was the site of a great festival, held every 4 years, featuring athletic contests. the modern Olympic Games, are named for this festival. Okay, because he's going to talk about Olympia in a minute. Nothing would be so great as maintenance in the Prytaneum, a reward which he deserves far more than the citizen who has won the prize at Olympia in the horse or chariot race. What's he drawing a distinction to? Contest, let's say, of sorts, of the mind versus sports. Okay? He's saying what I've done is better for the state than, let's say, the Olympics. Where in America do we see people who engage in quote-unquote contests of the mind celebrated over, let's say, Olympic athletes or any athletes? Where do teachers get paid more than a professional football player or baseball player or basketball player or any player? They don't, right? I mean, there are some teachers, professors, who do make a lot of money. MIT, Harvard, etc. There are some who make upwards of $1 million. $1 million is what if you're in the NFL? And somebody. I don't mean a bench warmer, but even the bench warmers make more than $1 million a year. Okay? He's saying this is important. And actually, it's more important than this is for society. He says, maybe you think I'm braving you in what I'm saying now. That is, challenging you, opposing you. As in what I said before about the tears and prayers. He says, not so. I cannot in a moment refute great slanders. In a moment, that is, the period of time I've had to deliver this apology. Because how old are the great slanders? How long-standing? They go back years. They go back to when he was in his early 20s. He's now 70. So 50 years? He says, you expect me to overcome 50 years of slander in, I don't know how long this thing would take to deliver. 30, 40 minutes? 50 minutes? As I am convinced that I never wronged another, I will assuredly not wrong myself. I will not say of myself that I deserve any evil or propose any penalty. That is, I didn't do anything wrong. So I shouldn't say to you, oh, well, here's what you should do to Socrates as punishment. Why should I? Because I'm afraid of the penalty of death, which Meletus proposes? That is, he's saying, should I propose something other than death because I'm afraid that you will give me death because that's what Meletus proposed? When I do not know whether death is a good or an evil, why should I propose a penalty which would certainly be an evil? That is, death might be good for me. Scourging, however, a beating, a whipping, that would definitely not be a good. So I'm not going to propose that. Imprisonment? Why should I live in prison and be the slave of the magistrates of the year? Exile? And this may possibly be the penalty which you will affix. Notice he's kind of implying there, and I've heard maybe there's talk about exile. I must indeed be blinded by the love of life if I am so irrational as to expect that when you, who are my own citizens, cannot endure my discourses and words, and found them so grievous and odious, that you don't want me around, that you think others are going to? Really? You're going to send me off to somewhere else, Corinth, and think I'm going to be able to live happily there when I don't know the people there, and I'm just going to anger them the way I've angered you? He says, no. Besides, what a life should I lead at my age, wandering from city to city, ever changing my place of exile, and always being driven out? Notice the assumption there. he'll never find rest. Why? Because he's going to go up and he's going to start asking questions. And she's going to go, get away. And he's going to go to the next town. And same kind of thing. He says, some of you will say, but Socrates, can't you just hold your tongue? Can't you just be quiet? Can you just leave Twitter alone for 24 hours, Then maybe you could go into a foreign city. Then maybe you could be happy. No one will interfere with you. He says, really, you think so? I already told you that for me to hold my tongue, what? Top of 1217, would be a disobedience to the God. When the God said, Socrates, you are the wisest man of all, he wasn't saying, Socrates is interpreting, you are the wisest man of all. He was saying, Socrates, prove no man is wise. Show no man has wisdom compared to the gods. So I got to go around and ask everybody, are you wise? Prove it to me. And then they prove that they aren't. So I go to the next person. So he says, if I don't do that, I'm going against the God. And if I say again that daily to discourse about virtue and of those other things about which you hear me examining myself and others is the greatest good of man, notice, daily discourse about virtue and the other things which he examines people about is the greatest good of man. What does he mean by that? That's why we're here. That's the purpose of life. To talk about virtue. But it's not just to talk. It's talk to an end. To acquire virtue. And those other things he questions about. He says, why? In that the unexamined life is not worth living. You are still less likely to believe me. So, the unexamined life is not worth living. Think of this in relation to, Oedipus. How much does Oedipus examine his life? I mean, really examine. He thinks of the prophecy. Okay? What about Creon? Agamemnon? Clytemnestra? Aegisthus? None of them really do. So what does he mean? So if the unexamined life is not worth living, it's such a negative statement. Let's make it positive. The examined life is worth living. So what does that mean? How do you examine your life? Existential philosophers, Jean-Paul Sartre, Camus, etc., tell us that our lives don't have meaning unless we do something. Okay? And by that do something, what they mean is we have to authenticate our existence. Okay, what's the root of that? What word does authenticate come from? Yeah, author. We have to author our existence. Why? Because existentialists believe there's no God. There's nobody that makes us, that gives us meaning. So we have to make our own meaning out of life. Okay? Part of that is this. You have to examine your life. And the existentialist said, guess what? Ultimately, there's really none of this. There is no worth to life. Nobody in this room ultimately means anything. But you have to make it seem like it does. Because otherwise, what are you left with? If it doesn't mean anything, what are you left with? There's no point. And that leads directly to another branch of philosophy, nihilism. The nihilists. Okay? Who say there is no point in life. There is no meaning in life. But the nihilists disagree with the existentialists because the nihilists say, doesn't matter what you do, there is still no point to life. Socrates disagrees. Why? Because Socrates does believe in the gods. Whatever for Socrates the gods meant. Okay? And you're going to see when we start Dante, Dante does not put Socrates where? In hell. He's not in hell. He's in limbo, which is just outside the entrance of hell. Why? Because he's one of the noble, virtuous pagans who sought virtue, who sought truth. Why is he there and not in heaven? Because to Dante's medieval Catholic mind, what's he like? Jesus. He lived before Jesus, therefore, no chance for heaven. Okay? Other writers of the Middle Ages in the church said, not so fast. We're going to take some of these so-called virtuous pagans. They do belong in heaven because they're pointing towards and they're doing the best that they can with what they have, essentially. So, the unexamined life is not worth living, or rephrase it, the examined life is worth living. So what does that mean to examine life? It's to do what he's been talking about. To ask the important questions. Not, what kind of car will I get when I'm making $100,000 a year? Or $50,000 a year? Or what kind of job do I need to have? But, what is, what is virtue? What is truth? What is good? What is beauty? What is justice? Because each one of those questions, as one wrestles with it, does what? It then requires action on the part of the individual. Because if you discover what truth is, or what good is, or what virtue is, and you determine the difference between virtue and vice, and if they are realities, it then becomes incumbent to do what? Unless you're Iago, or Edmund in King Lear, to live virtuously. Okay, the other day I asked the question, I had written it over here, what's the purpose of a university? And we talked about a variety of answers. You know why what the original idea of a university, or the academe, which is what Plato and Aristotle set up, was? It was this. It was education into virtue. It was not knowing facts. If any of you, I'm going to get way off topic here, but what the hell. Have any of you read C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia? Okay. You remember the second book, Voyage of the Dawn Treader, and the character Eustace Scrubb? Okay. What kind of books did Eustace Scrubb read? We're told at the beginning when we meet him. He has very progressive parents. Lewis actually uses the word progressive. Before it's a buzzword. Okay? He has very progressive parents. And he reads and knows all about, we are told, the imports and exports of Nicaragua. In other words, facts. And yet the narrator tells us the problem is he's read all the wrong kinds of books. Because he hasn't read books about knights defeating dragons or knights saving damsels, from ogres and such. He hasn't read books about virtues, about honor, loyalty, friendship, etc. Okay? And what happens to him? He becomes a dragon. Why? What do dragons in medieval tales, what are they always connected to? Greed. They're always greedy. He finds a pile of gold in a cave, and he's like, mine! And he falls asleep on it, and he wakes up, and he's a dragon. And then he has to become undragon. Why? He's got to shed all of the opposites of these. And we witness his transformation there. Okay? The education, the idea of the academy is the education into virtue. That idea was around as late as the 19th century. Cardinal Newman wrote a book, The Idea of the University. And the idea of the university was about ideas. It wasn't about jobs. It wasn't about producing workers for society. That idea of the university came about also in the 19th century as a result of what occurrence? What happened in the 19th century? The industrial age. Because once people left farms or small town jobs and you had factories arise, what happened? You got to have people to staff the factories, man the factories, so to speak. Okay? What we're doing here, even this kind of university, this is what, essentially. And I'm not demeaning MTSU by any means here. Okay? This is glorified K through 12. How so? Desks, all lined up. You come in, you take your space, and what? For the most part, it's lecture. And I don't like the freewheeling, just let's talk and get in touch with our feelings about what this means to me, because to some people, you wouldn't want to know what some of this stuff means to them. Anyways, what is K through 12 education designed to do?
Basic knowledge, standard knowledge.
Basic knowledge, standard knowledge. Okay, what else? It throws a bunch of people, different backgrounds, into the same room to make them what? Listen, obey, get along, follow directions, move according to, how do you know when to get up and leave and when not to? That whole modern public education system in the United States arose out of one thing, the industrial age. It was designed from its beginning to produce people who can follow directions, who can listen to a bell, that is, work according to a time schedule. Why do you have timed exams? Why do you have to do certain things in a certain little amount of time? Because of the industrialization aspect. See, modern American education system is what? It's Henry Ford and the assembly line. Finish grade 1, the assembly line moves on. Grade 2, the assembly line moves on. Grade 3. That's why we have social promotion. Even if a kid doesn't learn everything, you got to keep them going. Okay? It's not about this. I'm not saying that it ever could be about this anymore. It is at some schools, some private schools, but not any public universities. It's all about what? The acquisition of knowledge, information. Because we don't live in the industrial age anymore, do we? We are in the information age. You no longer even really, some of you might be interested in doing this or be thinking of doing this, you no longer really even go and get a Master's of Library Science. You get what? A Master's of Information Studies. Information Studies. Like books, you mean? The internet? Yeah, all of that. So that libraries become no longer concerned with Liebers, books. Okay? So, been talking about virtue. He says, had I money, I might have estimated the offense at what I was able to pay. It'd not have been much the worse. But I don't. Why doesn't he have any money? Why is he poor? Think school teacher, even though he's not quite the same. Because he's gone around just asking questions and never taken payment. But I have none, therefore I must ask you to proportion the fine to my means. Okay, well, maybe I could afford a mina, like a penny. Therefore, I propose that penalty. Socrates' decision to propose a monetary penalty is not mercenary, but just the opposite. It's a dramatization of his contempt for money as a measure of life and values. What is it that measures human life in our society? Who do people pay attention to? The wealthy, the nicely dressed, the people in nice cars. Who do they not pay attention to? The guy standing on the side of the highway on-ramp that says, hungry, out of work, anything helps. Pisses me off to no extent when I see cops giving panhandlers tickets. Just, they've already got it bad. Why pile even more on top of them? Why don't we just go back to the old days of the workhouse, where you throw poor people in prison? Think of the logic of that. Put somebody in prison until they can pay off their debt. And how do you pay off your debt when you're in prison? How do you make money? Well, you do actually make some money when you're in prison. It's only that you make a very little amount. Why? So that you stay in prison longer and do work that society needs done. That's the basis behind those poor laws, which go way back. Okay? Before Shakespeare. Henry VIII, actually, I think was the first one to pass the poor laws. Bastard that he was. Take my English 3010 course and you really find out what I think of Henry VIII. So he goes on. A penny. Well, Plato, Crito, Critobulus, Apollodorus, they'll pony up 30 minae. They'll be the guarantees. All right? That good, you guys? So there's another pause. How do you know? There's a longer break between paragraphs. What comes back as the punishment? Death. Not much time will be gained, O Athenians, in return for the evil name which you will get from the detractors of the city, who will say that you killed Socrates, a wise man. In other words, now you did it. Now everybody else is going to say, you killed a wise man. For they will call me wise, even although I am not wise, when they want to approach you. If you'd waited a little while, what? I would have died anyways. Like just the other day. 96-year-old man, I think was arrested in Germany. For what? Having been a World War II concentration camp guard. He's 96. Does he have much time to suck air? Probably not. I mean, he might live another 3, 4, 5 years. But you're going to send him to prison now? What does that just mean? I mean, get down to brass tacks, get down to just bald-faced numbers. Now, the state takes over what? Everything regarding his life. Rent, food, clothing. So now the state's paying for his subsistence. Just think about that for a moment. So he goes on. You think I was acquitted because I was convicted because I had no words of the sort which would have procured my acquittal? I mean, if I had thought fit to leave nothing undone or unsaid. That is, if I didn't have any virtue in me and I was willing to say anything to get off. No. The deficiency which led to my conviction was not of words. That is, it's not that I didn't have the right words or the right rhetoric. No. Here's why I was convicted. I had the boldness or impudence or inclination to address you as you would have liked me to do. Excuse me, I had not the boldness or impudence or inclination. He's saying, you convicted me. Why? Because I was Socrates and I didn't suck up to you. I didn't what? Weeping, wailing, lamenting, saying and doing many things which you have been accustomed to hear from others, and which I maintain are unworthy of me. That is, others can do it, not me. I would rather die having spoken after my manner than speak in your manner and live. In other words, I have integrity. For neither in war nor yet at law ought I or any man to use every way of escaping death. But why not? I thought death is the great evil. Death is the greatest thing to be feared. Death is the greatest thing to, for one, to try to get away from. I mean, the whole Harry Potter series is about, essentially, two people. One whose name means what? Flee from death. And the other, the entire series, is about one thing. Harry must learn how to die. You learn how to die. You just stop breathing, right? you cease to exist. Harry must learn how to die well. Sorry, my crud's coming back. That's what he's talking about here. He says, often in battle there can be no doubt that if a man will throw away his arms, fall on his knees before his pursuers, he may escape death. Now, he doesn't know it. But in the Aeneid, which is going to be written about 400 years after this, there's a character, I think it's Turnus, who falls down on his knees before Aeneas, throws his arms around Aeneas' knees, and begs mercy. Let me live. And Aeneas goes, no, pulls up his sword, right down through his throat, essentially. Okay? In other dangers, there are other ways of escaping death, if a man is willing to say and do anything. The difficulty, my friends, is not to avoid death, but to avoid unrighteousness. For that runs faster than death. Unrighteousness, the opposite of virtue. He says, a lot of people will flee death. And in fleeing death, they do what? Unrighteous things. They act wrongly. Why? Because they assume death is what? Okay, escapable. What else? It is the ultimate bad. It is the worst. That there is nothing worse than death. Okay? That death should be fled from at all costs, no matter what. So he says, I'm going to prophesy for you. Prop of 12:18. I'm about to die, and in their hour of death, men are gifted with prophetic power. Here's my prophecy. To those of you who are my murderers, immediately after my departure, punishment far heavier than you have inflicted on me will surely await you. Me you've killed because you wanted to escape the accuser. That is, you silenced me. Okay, you got me out of your hair. And not to give an account of your lives. They were tired of what? Being examined. They were tired of his probing questions. They wanted to live life how? We don't have one in here. With the idiot box just blaring on away. What's the purpose of television? The purpose. It's entertainment, right? What's the purpose of entertainment? Pacification, one way of looking at it. It is a distraction. A distraction of what? Go into a silent room and just stay there and keep the room silent. How long can you do it? To just exist totally, perfectly in silence. Most Americans can't. So they put in the earbuds, turn on the TV, turn on a radio. Got to have sound. Why? Because the silence makes you do what? You turn inward and you start to think, and the gears start to move. Shakespeare, went to the sweet sessions of silent thought. I think of you, he says in one of his sonnets. And what happens? A cascade of memories. When does that happen? When the speaker in that sonnet is sitting in a silent room. So, we like distractions. TV, movies, internet, drugs, sex, alcohol, stuff. Anything to pull us away from examining ourselves. To really thinking the deep questions that plague everybody. So, he says, there's going to be more accusers of you than there are now. I'm not the only one. Others will come. Hitherto, next paragraph, a few lines down. I don't know how much I'll say about Aristotle, because we're going to start Dante on Tuesday. Hitherto, the divine faculty of which the internal oracle is the source has constantly been in the habit of opposing me, even about trifles. If I was going to make a slip or error in any matter, that is, if he was starting to go off on the wrong, something inside would say, stop. And now, as you see, there has come upon me that which may be thought and is generally believed to be the last and worst evil. What is that? Death. But the oracle made no sign of opposition. That is, when I heard about the sentence being death, the oracle didn't speak to me. He was never told, well, Socrates, you got to do something. Death is really bad, man. I mean, you got to run from this. No. He says, even when I was on my way to court or while I was speaking, at anything I was going to say. But in the past, I have been stopped in the middle of a speech. He says, I'm going on along and just, I shut down because something inside says, not right. Now, nothing has stopped me. What do I take to be the explanation of the silence? It's this. It's an intimation that what has happened to me is a good, and that those of us who think that death is an evil are in error. For the customary sign would surely have opposed me, had I been going to evil and not to good. Notice what he's convinced of, or by. His conscience. His conscience tells him, I'm right here. So, let's reflect in another way. And we shall see there's great reason to hope that death is a good. Notice, a good. Not good in and of itself, but that it leads to a good. For one of two things. Either death is a state of nothingness and utter consciousness. Have any of you read Philip Pullman's his Dark Materials trilogy? Golden Compass, or Northern Lights as it's also called? Okay? That's Pullman's thesis. This is essentially the modern, the modern atheist perspective. You die, that's it. Your body dissolves. What is you, your consciousness, just disappears in the atoms and ether of the universe, and that's it. There's nothing. Okay? That's the one, he says. Or, as other men say, there is a change in migration of the soul from this world to another. What's the other? Well, this world is what? Allegory of the cave. The other is the real world. This world, Lewis's Shadowlands. The other, the true Narnia, the real Narnia. If a person were to select a night in which his sleep was undisturbed, even by dreams, and were to compare with this the other days and nights of his life, and then were to tell us how many days and nights he had passed in the course of his life better and more pleasantly than this one, I think that any man, I won't say a private man, but even the king, will not find many such days or nights when compared with the others. Now, if death be such a nature, then I say that to die is gain. For eternity is then only a single night. But if death is the journey to another place, that is, if death is like sleep and a sleep without any dreams, then dying is good, right? Because no dreams, no problems, no consciousness, no awareness. No what? No problems. No pain. No discomfort. It's just... But if it's a migration to another place, and there, as men say, all the dead abide, what good can be greater than this? Notice he's not talking about another place of judgment or blessing. He's not talking heaven, hell. Just another place where all the dead. He says, think about that. Then you get to leave professors of justice in this world and what? Find the true judges who are said to give judgment there. And he mentions the judges in the Greek mythology. What would not a man give if he might converse with Orpheus and Musaeus and Hesiod and Homer? And we could go on. And Socrates and Plato and Aristotle and Virgil and Dante and my favorite, Shakespeare. To actually be able to sit down with Shakespeare and say, Bill, did you really write all those sonnets? Did you mean them in the order that they're in? Did you really write multiple versions of Hamlet and King Lear? Because it's kind of confusing to us students, you know. Which one did you mean? Or any of an other thousands of writers? He says, you know, either of those options is what? Good. Either of those options is good. But either of those options are both what? Now. Unknown. They're not proven. Death's the great unknown. If something is unknown, why should we fear it? We don't fear going out that door every day. And yet, logically speaking, we don't know what lies outside that door every day. We think we do based upon past experience. Okay? Go from there, I'm going to leave the rest of that since we only have 15 minutes left, to Aristotle. Now, Aristotle's Poetics is primarily about, even though it's poetics, it sounds like it's about poetry, it's primarily about what kind of poetry? Tragedy. Or tragic drama. Supposedly, Aristotle also wrote a treatise on comedy. Doesn't exist. Doesn't survive. That becomes the base. That becomes the basis for Umberto Eco's The Name of the Rose. Big, long, massive novel. Okay? Where somebody has discovered Aristotle's lost manuscript of comedy. And it's dangerous because it says some ideas that kind of lead readers possibly to think that, hey, life in this world is really what's important. You can forget the other world. The people who find it, by the way, are monks. They all live for what? The other world. Okay? So, he talks in here about drama and tragedy. What does he say every drama is? Or every play is? Let's use modern language. What do you see in every play? What's its basis at its very heart? It is a imitation, right? It's an imitation of life. Whose life? Well, the tragic hero's life. Okay? But it has to be a real imitation. It has to be serious for it to be tragedy. It's got to be high. It's got to be lofty. Okay? What must the tragic hero, what kind of person must the tragic hero be? Can the tragic hero be the guy standing at the side of 24 with the sign like this? No. Okay? Can the tragic hero be the President of the United States? Yeah, but not usually best. The tragic hero needs to be somebody higher than the average, because what is going to happen in every tragedy? What happens to the tragic hero? They fall. They're brought down. What is that fall called by Aristotle? Nope. That can be the cause of the fall. The unraveling is part. That's the denouement is the entire action of the fall. But what?
The reversal.
Yes, it's the reversal. Okay. When does the reversal begin? What has to happen just prior to the reversal? It's what causes the reversal to start. The recognition. Okay? Recognition of what? Truth? The oops?
Yeah.
So, think of Oedipus the king. Where's the recognition? Is it when Oedipus just starts to have an inkling? Is it when he thinks, I might have actually killed Laius on that crossroads? Good thing my dad is Polybus back in Corinth. No, because he's not recognizing the truth there. Where is it? Is it when the messenger goes, oh, you think your father was really Polybus? No. No, he was your adopted father. No, you were given to me as a baby. Yeah, by that shepherd right there. And the shepherd says, I got you where? Directly from Laius's hands. Ah! Oedipus screams. Why? Recognition. Boom! That's the reversal. I mean, and how quickly does it come in Oedipus the king? It's, he falls fast. Okay? So then let's apply this to Antigone. No, let's not apply it to Antigone, because that's what that does. Give it all away. Does it work with Aeschylus? Agamemnon? It does, actually. See, the nice thing about Aristotle is he works from particulars to arrive at a general idea, rather than Plato and Socrates working from a general idea down to the particulars. Okay? So when he writes the Poetics and he talks about tragedy, although he holds out Sophocles as being the greatest exemplar, and Oedipus the king as being the most perfect, okay, he does also talk about Euripides and Aeschylus. So you could take what he writes, okay, about tragedy, and you can apply it just as well to Agamemnon. It doesn't work as perfectly as it does with Oedipus the king, because he kind of models what he's saying based upon Oedipus the king. Okay, so what else about a tragic hero? We say he falls. Why? Why is it that kind of action? What is the purpose for having the tragic hero fall? What is the purpose on the part of the audience? Pity? It's supposed to elicit pity, right? What else? What about fear? I heard something about it. Okay, what about fear? There's something else. He says, seeing the action, seeing the occurrence, watching this imitation, is supposed to do something to the audience. Because what do you have at the beginning? Right? Tragedy works like this. And comedy works like this. You have, at the beginning, the complication. What's the complication in Oedipus the King? I mean, almost immediately, what do we find out? There's a plague in the city. Okay? So everything builds from that. So you have, Aristotle doesn't use these words, these come out later. The rising action. Okay? What's this? This is the climax. This is the moment of reversal. Now, notice this implies that the denouement kind of acts about the same time frame as the rising action. Oedipus the King, it doesn't, right? It's, here it's a right triangle rather than a isosceles triangle. He gets to the top and jumps, okay? So what else happens over here? And why does it happen? Why does the tragic hero suffer a reversal? And he recognizes something. What's the something he recognizes? What leads to that reversal? You have the so-called tragic flaw in the tragic hero. What's Oedipus's tragic flaw? Louder?
He has to know everything.
He has to know everything? He does, right? I mean, he just doesn't stop. When Jocasta realizes, she's like, Oedipus, stop. We'll just live the way we are now, and just stop, please. Okay? But he's like, no, I've got to know. She's like, okay, kills herself. Okay? The tragic flaw, what Colin said, was hubris, often. Hubris is pride, bordering on arrogance. Okay? The word he actually uses is hamartia, which in the New Testament gets translated as sin. What does it literally mean? Missing the mark. The tragic hero misses the mark. In other words, tries, but fails. See, I think a good definition of tragedy would be when a person has got to make a decision, but doesn't have all the information necessary to make the right decision. What information is Oedipus lacking at the beginning of the play? Or even before the beginning of the play? That he was adopted. If he'd known he was adopted in Corinth, would he ever have fled Corinth? Nope. Because he could say, Mom, kind of, Dad, kind of. Whew, I can live here forever. Even if I do kill you and sleep with you, prophecy's not fulfilled. Okay? He's missing that information. Okay? What information is Agamemnon missing in that poem, or in that play? His wife's cheating on him, shacking up with Aegisthus. And has been for apparently a long time. Okay? So you have that go on. What else? In relation to why the tragic hero needs to be somebody of relatively high standing, above the common ordinary. Because it has to be somebody we can identify with and simultaneously have some envy of. Because we don't want to see somebody like us fall, right? Because it happens all the time. It's everyday life. But seeing somebody who's risen to great heights can mean what? Well, I too can rise to great heights, but I better not do what they did. See, one of the things that Aristotle says, and I'll stop with this, that Aristotle says the tragic play does for the audience is he talks about this. Catharsis, which is what? Purgation of those two things. Pity and fear. So that the complication here builds up what? Watch any Shakespearean tragedy. It builds the tension. Okay? Because you know, if it's a tragedy, it's going to end in death, somebody's death. Right? And the purgation, the catharsis comes when you see what the great hero suffers. Oedipus, we're told, what? Suffered more than any man alive. Take my Shakespeare course in the spring. I think I'm going to do King Lear. And we'll read King Lear, and what do we hear? Lear suffers more than anybody. Okay? Real quickly. I said this is the form for tragedy. This is the form for comedy. Comedy and tragedy should be like this, actually. Begin at essentially the same point. Okay? Tragedy, the problem builds and builds and builds and builds. Okay? How is it restored? How is society restored? Usually a bunch of people die. In comedy, the society suffers a rip or tear. Okay? And it gets down to this point, and at this point in a comedy can become a tragedy. Winter's Tales, perfect example. Midsummer Night's Dream, okay, which MTSU is going to be doing in a couple of weeks. Same thing. Lovers are out there in the forest. Demetrius and Lysander could go at each other and kill each other. We've left comedy, we've become a tragedy. But what happens? In a comedy, society is restored. Everybody, nearly so, is happy again. Marriages that have been disrupted are now repaired. Relationships between fathers and daughters, usually, are now restored. Maybe not perfectly. Midsummer Night's Dream. Okay? Aegeus still is not happy that his daughter is going to marry Demetrius. He still wants him to marry Lysander. But the Duke says, deal with it. And if the Duke tells you to deal with it, you find a way to deal with it. Okay? All right, we'll stop there. So, I don't remember how I've got it divided in the syllabus, but probably something like the first 10 or 11 cantos of the Inferno for Tuesday. And expect a quiz.